Welcome to NewsRap Local. I'm your host, Justin Chapman. Happy Pride Month. Thank you for tuning in. After providing a few brief updates on various local stories, we'll take a deeper look at housing, which seems to be on everyone's mind these days, and for good reason. Last month, the West Pasadena Residents Association held its annual meeting, and the topic was housing, specifically how Pasadena can expand its inventory of affordable housing without losing its unique identity. Our guest today is Ryan Bell, Southern California Regional Coordinator of Tenants Together. Ryan is a member of the Pasadena Tenant Justice Coalition, which has submitted a rent control and just cause eviction charter amendment to the city and has begun to collect signatures to put the measure on the June 2022 ballot. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to housing, but first let's turn to our lightning round of news updates.
Very low-income households in Pasadena with at least one disabled adult family member between ages 18 and 62 can benefit from a new rental assistance program. The Mainstream Opportunity Voucher Enhanced, or MOVE, rental program launched on May 6th. Created by the Pasadena Department of Housing, MOVE gives priority to Pasadena households that are currently experiencing homelessness. Qualified households can call the Citizen Service Center at 626-744-7311 for an initial screening. Households meeting the pre-screening criteria for a voucher will be referred to the Coordinated Entry System, a county-wide process for facilitating access to appropriate housing intervention services. A plaque at Mills Place could be updated to provide information on a violent, racially motivated attack that occurred there nearly 135 years ago. The incident began with a fire started by a racist mob attacking Asian residents and vandalizing Pasadena's Chinatown, ultimately destroying a laundry business owned by Chinese settlers. According to an article from the long-defunct Pasadena and Valley Union newspaper, over the course of 24 hours, enraged racists drove Pasadena's 60 to 100 Chinese citizens from the city in an ordeal that culminated in threats of a mass lynching. Today, a plaque at the corner of Mills Place and Green Street in Old Town Pasadena reads, "Named for Alexander Fraser Mills, a nurseryman who planted a citrus grove on 7.5 acres at the northwest corner of Colorado Boulevard and Fair Oaks Avenue in 1878. Two Pasadena residents familiar with the city's history notified City Council member Felicia Williams that the description does not accurately reflect events which occurred on the site. The Pasadena Convention and Visitors Bureau says tourism is making a comeback as pandemic restrictions loosen and California's tourism season begins. The long-term outlook for California has many feeling optimistic. Tourism Economics, a research company, has projected that domestic visitor spending in California will reach 76% of 2019 levels this year, and projects it to reach nearly 94% by 2022. The outlook for summer travel in California is also positive, and international travel could hit 87%. And as Californians resume traveling, they have the power to jumpstart the state's economic recovery simply by keeping their trips within California.
1. The City Council's Economic Development and Technology Committee directed city staff to look into loosening the city's cannabis regulations that currently allow only one dispensary per council district, and to consider reducing the distance required between dispensaries. Staff will soon return to the committee with a new report, and then the committee will make a formal recommendation to the full city council. 2. The Pasadena Water and Power Department has launched its Shape Up Summer campaign to encourage the community to reduce water use by 10%. Scientists have said the American West may be going through the worst drought period in centuries. We all need to do our part on this. 3. Pasadena Unified School District Board of Education President Scott Phelps said in his recent State of the Schools address that the district is, quote, planning to fully open the 2021 to 2022 school year with a 5-day in-person schedule that includes expanded opportunities for academic recovery and acceleration of student learning, end quote. He also said that, in general, the financial state of PUSD is good for the immediate future. In another education-related story, Pasadena City College has received a $30 million gift from Mackenzie Scott, an author, philanthropist, and former wife of Amazon founder Jeff Bezos. 4. However, the same cannot be said for the Rose Bowl. Next year is the iconic stadium centennial, but its financial outlook is not looking good. In a May 17th letter to City Council, City Manager Steve Mermel said, quote, "The future financial position of the Rose Bowl Stadium has been brought into stark relief by the pandemic. The financial challenge associated with the Rose Bowl is as significant as anything the city has faced in decades. And until the matter is resolved, fiscal prudence is required more than ever," end quote. The stadium will need $26 million over the next 5 years to cover its debt obligations and needs new sources of revenue. 5, Noah Griffin of Muir High School received $7,500 as part of the Anthony McLean Social Justice Scholarship, recently created by Dennis Haywood, who we interviewed last month here on NewsRap Local, the director of a new documentary called Thorns on the Rose that examines the last 40 years of police-community relations in Pasadena. The funds were raised through donations and proceeds from the film. 6, the Pasadena Public Works Department is looking for a new director after R.M. Loyan, who helped lead the department out of the infamous 2014 embezzlement scandal, retired recently after nearly 6 years. Chris Markarian has been appointed acting director of the department. 7, mosquito control officials confirmed the first indication of West Nile virus in Los Angeles County this year. The potentially fatal virus, for which there is no cure, was detected in a dead crow collected in South Pasadena. As the weather heats up, the San Gabriel Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District is encouraging everyone to prevent mosquito bites by eliminating stagnant water around your home, tossing out unused containers that can hold stagnant water, and using insect repellent. 8, journalists at the Pasadena Star News and 10 other daily newspapers voted overwhelmingly to form a union. Learn more about this by reading my story in Pasadena Now. 9, about 75% of Pasadenans are fully vaccinated. We're approaching herd immunity status in this city. According to ABC News, Pasadena leads the state in terms of our COVID-19 vaccination rate. No other California city has recorded a greater rate of vaccination. There have been 11,316 COVID-19 cases and 249 deaths. As COVID restrictions begin to loosen and we start opening back up, on Saturday, June 26th, the city will celebrate 626 Day, a citywide campaign encouraging locals and visitors to support Pasadena's businesses and cultural institutions, many of which will be offering discounts and in-person promotions. And 10, the Pasadena Police Department is recommending city officials reallocate $225,000 from its normal operating budget to fund a full-time team to provide unarmed responses to service calls involving mental health issues or problems related to homelessness. In other words, they want to get out ahead of activists calling for a similar service that exists outside of and independent from the police department. This comes as the city proposes a $1.7 million increase to the police budget, bringing the total to nearly $93 million, which while calls continue to grow for community alternatives to police services. This will definitely be something for the community to keep its eye on and make its voice heard about. Also, the city of Pasadena finally has a civilian police oversight commission. This has been a long time coming. Calls for civilian oversight date back 40 years to activist Michael Zinzan. Last week, the council unanimously approved the remaining Civilian Police Oversight Commission members. The 11-member commission is composed of 7 women and 4 men, including 5 African-American members, though only 1 African-American man. Those members include a retired sheriff's department lieutenant, a retired judge, and a former prosecutor with experience in excessive force litigation, which some say seems to go against the spirit, if not quite the letter, of the whole point behind the creation of the commission, which was to be populated by civilians untethered to law enforcement. The city council also voted to enter into a 1-year $75,000 contract with Modern Policing, a service of the Maxey Group, headed by Brian Maxey, for the independent police auditor position, which will, among other things, serve as a best practices advisor to the Oversight Commission, review uses of force by Pasadena police officers, review investigations of personnel complaints of bias-based policing, and recommend changes to the police department policies, procedures, or officer training. Maxey is currently the deputy monitor overseeing a federal consent decree with the Cleveland Police Department and also handles a similar role with the Baltimore Police Department. And finally, after first denying that there are fish in the Arroyo Seco, the Pasadena Water and Power Department has changed course and agreed to discuss with the Arroyo Seco Foundation and the Pasadena Audubon Society how to protect the fish and aquatic species in the arroyo. Last fall, the State Department of Fish and Wildlife translocated 469 rainbow trout from the West Fork of the San Gabriel River to the Arroyo Seco as part of a fish rescue program following the Bobcat fire. The settlement by the Arroyo Seco Foundation and other groups proposed to the city would require that the design and operations of the city's new Arroyo Seco Canyon project, including a dam and diversion facilities, will provide for fish passage. That project would increase how much water the city diverts from 35% to 50%. A hearing about the project's environmental impact report has been rescheduled for July 12th. Now, before we bring in our guests, let's shift gears and set the scene as it relates to housing in Pasadena. Pasadena is in the process of updating the city's housing element, which allows each city to prepare a community-specific approach to how and where housing will be addressed to meet the needs of the community. Pasadena is required to update the housing element every 8 years to support continued progress toward meeting diverse community housing needs and to address regional housing production targets. The current housing element update program will cover the period from 2021 through 2029. The state has determined that during that period, Pasadena needs 9,429 new residential units, known as the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And that number is based on the number of jobs in the city. The city is inviting Pasadena residents to share ideas about meeting Pasadena's housing needs by completing a short survey, which you can find on the city's website. As everyone knows, affordable housing is extremely hard to find. California's median home price is 2.5 times the national median. Houses are selling immediately, with some buyers putting down full price cash bids without even seeing the property. About 62% of Pasadena residents are tenants, not homeowners. Half of those renters are what's called rent burden, meaning they spend more than 30% of their household income on rent. And 27% of renters are severely rent burdened, meaning they spend more than 50% of their household income on rent. The city has acknowledged that severe rent burden is the greatest predictor of homelessness, and the median rent is unaffordable to most working people and increasing at a faster rate than the consumer price index. So on that note, let's patch in our guest, Ryan Bell. Ryan, welcome to NewsRap Local, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Ryan is the Southern California Regional Coordinator for Tenants Together, a statewide coalition of local tenant organizations dedicated to defending and advancing the rights of California tenants to safe, decent, and affordable housing. It is California's only statewide renters' rights organization. Ryan has been involved in organizing housing justice and other social justice campaigns in Los Angeles and the San Gabriel Valley for the past 15 years. He is currently a member organizer with the Pasadena Tenants Union and a Pasadena City Commissioner on the Northwest Commission. Ryan also volunteers as the Humanist Chaplain at the University of Southern California and previously worked at the Secular Student Alliance. He ran for Pasadena City Council in District 6 last year. Ryan is part of a tenants' rights groups and activists called the Pasadena Tenant Justice Coalition, which has launched a new petition effort to put a rent control and just cause eviction charter amendment measure on the ballot in Pasadena in the June 2022 primary election. The measure is called the Pasadena Fair and Equitable Housing Charter Amendment. And the purpose is to promote neighborhood and community stability, healthy housing, and affordability for renters in Pasadena by regulating excessive rent increases and arbitrary evictions to the maximum extent permitted under California law, while ensuring landlords a fair return on their investment and guaranteeing fair protections for renters, homeowners, and businesses. This is the second attempt at a rent control ballot measure, following one in 2018. So in order to qualify for the June 2022 ballot, they must first get over 13,000 valid signatures of registered voters in the city of Pasadena on their petition by this November, and they're shooting for about 18 to 20,000 in case any get thrown out. And they began canvassing last weekend. So Ryan, did I get all of that right?
Yeah, man, that was great. You got it all.
So why don't you give us a quick rundown of the housing landscape in Pasadena, and then also what this charter amendment would do if passed and why those measures are necessary.
Yeah, no, you covered a lot of it already, but I would just emphasize that, the new American Community Survey numbers from 2019 show that the number of renter households has increased in Pasadena quite significantly, from about 57% to about 62%. And then when you look at, and a particular concern to the Northwest community, the percentage of Black and Brown families that rent is much higher than the average. So over 67% of Black and Latino families are renting their housing. And so any crisis related to renting affects Black and brown communities even more significantly than you would expect just in the general average. So, yeah, and we've seen the price of rent go up in Pasadena, not only out of proportion to the consumer price index, which is that average index of consumer goods in regions, and our region is considered, LA County roughly, but it's also out of proportion with other rents in other cities around LA County, including LA City, in part because LA City has rent control, and it's just people are being priced out. They can't afford to stay here, and we could talk about whether that's okay or not for people not to be able to afford to stay here. But I think there's a lot of evidence that it is disruptive to community stability, community harmony, all the things that we value about living in a rich community full of opportunities and diversity and arts and culture and all the rest, to have a place where you won't worry that you're going to be just booted out in the next 6 months to a year.
Right. And so this amendment, it's amending the city charter. So, this is really going around the city council and directly to Pasadena residents, right?
Right. That's right. We've asked the city council on a number of occasions whether we could have a conversation about rent stabilization. We have made some progress in city council around compensating individuals who are unjustly evicted from their apartments. These are what are known as no fault, just cause evictions. So to make sure our viewers are tracking with us, there are evictions that are your fault, the tenant's fault, right? Like if you don't pay your rent, or if you cause a nuisance, a severe nuisance to your neighbors, or you're doing something illegal in the unit. A number of reasons why you can be legally and justly evicted from your apartment. Then there are no fault evictions. Those are the evictions that happen even though the tenant is not at fault of breaking the lease. A number of those include, like, the landlord wants to move into the unit themselves or their family member, or they want to take the rental unit off the market, or they want to demolish the building and put up something else. There are a number of reasons why a landlord could evict people without it being the tenant's fault. And in those cases, the city of Pasadena has helped by requiring landlords to compensate those tenants for their need to move to another place to live. But they've not been open to rent control. There are a lot of myths around rent control that persist. And so, yeah, the reason that we're going to the ballot again is that we just haven't had any traction with the city council.
Right. And so one thing it would do is, instead of raising rent up to 10% multiple times in a year, this amendment would limit it to once a year, and the raises would be based on inflation rates, right?
Right. So it would, the key to the rent control logic is that annual rent increases would be tied to that CPI, that consumer price index, which is again a reading of like how much your breakfast cereal goes up, how much your clothing that you buy at the Gap or wherever you buy your clothing goes up, and rent would be connected to that index. And we feel that that's fair. In California, actually, by state law, landlords are entitled to a fair return on their housing that they're renting out, and that doesn't really exist in most states. We could have a very interesting conversation just about that. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't deprive landlords of a fair return because it's against state law to do so.
Mm-hmm. And then I think it's also at 75% of the cost of living increase, so that
Right.
sort of allows wages to catch up. It lessens tenants' rent burden over time. And then there's also no expiration date for the amendment, right?
Right. Yeah. Talk about no expiration date. It would be an amendment to the charter. So even city council couldn't change it without putting it back on the ballot and getting the vote of Pasadena voters.
And so as I mentioned, in 2018, rent control advocates in Pasadena missed the deadline to turn in petition signatures for the ballot that year. Do you think this effort is going to be successful? And do you think Pasadena voters will approve it?
Yeah, like I think it will be successful. I don't want to be naive or lie to you by saying I think it'll be easy. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult. When you think about amending a city charter, it's deliberately difficult, right? That's not the kind of thing that city officials want to have happen, you know, once a year or even once a decade necessarily. So it's designed to be difficult, but we think that our coalition is stronger than it was 2 or 3 years ago. We feel like we have the message has, been more broadly distributed and advertised. People are suffering, I think, much more than they were even in 2018, especially in the wake of COVID. I was talking to one of our campaign supporters, and we were talking about how even though the infection rates are down to almost zero in Pasadena with COVID, we're going to be recovering from COVID for 5, maybe 10 years. The same way when you think back to Hurricane Katrina or any other major catastrophe, or even just the 2008-9 financial crisis around housing, there are people who have still not recovered from that. And then so these crises have compounding effects, and people that lost their housing in 2008, 2009 due to foreclosure, maybe they're still renting. I've talked to several that never did buy a house again, and now they're facing eviction due to lack of income to pay rent due to COVID. So, it's like every time, it's like a ratchet. Like every time, another crisis happens, it just tightens the bolt a little bit tighter. And we really feel that rent control will really allow the housing market to catch up, as you said a minute ago, to normal expenses within our community. It'll take a while to do that, but we think that it will help a lot.
And what's the status right now regarding evictions? When are landlords going to be able to start evicting tenants again?
Well, it's a very timely question. So it's June 18 when folks are watching this, and the eviction moratorium at the state level expires at the end of the month, which is only 12 days from now. We don't know yet what the extension will be, if any. The governor has verbally signaled that there will be an extension. We know with the governor under threat of recall, he's probably not going to say things out loud that he doesn't intend to follow through on like that. So it's probably reasonable to assume that it will be extended, but we don't know for how long. But we do know that the rental assistance hasn't yet reached people who have applied for it and qualify for it. So it makes no sense to allow landlords to start evicting people for non-payment when the financial assistance designed to help them make those payments hasn't arrived yet.
Mhm.
And I think state officials understand that. And so that's why we're probably looking at an extension. My guess would be into the fall, somewhere September, probably.
And then quickly, a three-part question. So which groups are supporting this ballot measure so far? What feedback have you heard about it? And then is the charter amendment language itself public yet?
Yeah, so the coalition partners include the League of Women Voters in Pasadena area, the Affordable Housing Services, which is a small nonprofit affordable housing development project here in Pasadena, the Democratic Socialist of America Los Angeles chapter, Ground Game LA. Just recently, we were happy to welcome Progressive Asian Network for Action. And we also have Caltech students that are part of this campaign. And we're in conversation with quite a few others. In fact, I just got off a call before I joined you with a potential community sponsor. Each of these groups has, their own process to go through to vote on that. The reaction has been really positive so far. I've been really impressed. I was out canvassing last weekend, and we didn't get a lot of people not home, but no like really negative responses or even modestly negative responses. And finally, we do have the petition language available. It's on our Google Drive, and we're sharing when we go door to door. We have a QR code people can scan and access the petition. But I don't know if you're going to be able to give folks my contact information on the show, but anyone's welcome to contact me and visit our website at pasadenatenantjustice.org.
Great. And, I hear a lot of people saying a couple of things. We can't build our way out of the affordable housing crisis. And also, a lot of people who are really active in the community, have been for a long time, some of whom are quite progressive, frame the recent state mandates for affordable housing, such as granny flats and stuff, in a negative light, arguing that it's destroying single family neighborhoods and the character of our neighborhoods. What are your thoughts on those two arguments? Can't build our way out of the affordable housing crisis, and the state mandates for affordable housing are destroying single family neighborhoods.
Well, I agree that we can't build our way out of the crisis that we're in. It's too big of a crisis, and it's too expensive to build affordable or even market rate housing. And so, yeah, we'll never get there. People are becoming homeless faster than we're building units. So that's not to say that we don't need to build some housing, though. I think we do need to build affordable housing. Pasadena has much more than its share of market rate and luxury housing. And what we need desperately is workforce housing. So in terms of single family neighborhoods, Pasadena is for their single family neighborhoods. And I live very near to one of the most famous single family neighborhoods, and it's not going anywhere. It's not like we're going to raise, single family homes to put up apartment towers. That's not going to happen. What we do need to have happen, though, is to build apartments and do adaptive reuse in places where we can do that. And the gentle infill of ADUs, it's like a kind of a moral panic, I think, that's not really going to materialize. People are going to build ADUs if they want to. If they don't want to, they're not going to, and everything's going to be fine. But it's not going to solve, ADUs are not going to solve affordable housing. It'll help a little tiny bit, but I'm not against it. But to think that that's going to solve our problem, it's just not.
Mm-hmm. And what about something like State Senator Anthony Portantino's Senate Bill 15? It gives incentives to cities to convert abandoned retail sites into affordable and workforce housing, especially with many more storefronts now empty because of the pandemic. Is that part of the solution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, adaptive reuse is both environmentally smart to do because you're not throwing a bunch of stuff away and starting over. And it just makes sense to reuse these spaces for something that we need, and especially as we see trends away from a retail retail storefronts.
Great. Well, Ryan Bell, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you providing us with your insights on this.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
Before we sign off, be sure to fill out an online survey being conducted by Black Lives Matter Pasadena about how to improve police-community relations. The survey is available at the URL on your screen. And finally, as the major infrastructure bills currently wind their way through Congress, I'd like to argue that they should include funds for local news. Local news is the backbone of any community. It is infrastructure, and it's in dire shape right now. I encourage everyone, from local residents to local government officials, all the way up to our senators and members of Congress, to support local news. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode of NewsRap Local. I'm Justin Chapman, signing off. Tune in every third Friday of the month at 5 p.m. You can watch it on Channel 32 on Charter Spectrum, Channel 99 on AT&T Uverse, YouTube, Facebook, and the Pasadena Media streaming app on Amazon Fire TV, Apple TV, and Roku. Learn more at pasadenamedia.org and justindouglaschapman.com. Sign up for my monthly email newsletter to get updates on my work by visiting justinchapman.substack.com/subscribe. Take care, stay safe, and go get vaccinated.